I would say be careful with some organic fertilizers. They could be too slow because we're only working with about a 4 to 6 week window here. We don't have a long time for... What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Tuesday, August 29th here in South Georgia. And on today's video, we're going to talk about fertilizing your seedlings. So I'm going to show you several different ways to feed your little transplants you may have going right now for fall. And then we'll show you how we do it. But before we get into that, I guess we need to talk about Miss Idalia that's coming through here tomorrow. Now, I know all the folks on the Weather Channel are calling her Idalia, but I just can't bring myself to say that. So we're going to call her Idalia. And I realize by the time this video airs, Idalia will be long gone. But she's supposed to come through here in the morning. Looks like the middle of it or the center of the hurricane is going to go a little bit east of us, kind of through Valdosta, Georgia, which is about an hour away from here. We're still probably going to get some 40-mile-an-hour winds and a bunch of rain. So I figured before we go to the greenhouse, it'd be good to show you all what's standing right now before the hurricane or maybe a tropical storm by the time it gets here, before that all rolls through here. So this is our McCormick's Blue Giant corn. It ended up getting pretty tall in some spots, maybe upwards of 10 foot tall. It's looking pretty good, been able to reduce the worm damage a little bit. The height is not super consistent. Some stalks are really tall, some are kind of average. The good thing about this corn is we don't have any ears on it yet. If you've got some heavy ears on corn and you get a big storm like this, a lot of times it can be ball game. This is probably going to get blown over a good bit, but hopefully it will have time to stand back up before it starts producing some big ears. We've got these tall sunflowers here in the raised bed garden. Those are almost guaranteed to get blown over. They're just standing up there asking for it. So those will probably be toast. Over here in this plot, we've got our Orleans sweet taters. They're looking really, really good. Now, obviously, we're not worried about wind damage on these, but we could be worried about too much rain. And it just so happens earlier today, I was on the phone with one of the guys from Steel Plant Company where we got these sweet potato plants. He was checking to see how hard a hit we were going to take from this hurricane. And we got to talking about getting a bunch of rain at one time when sweet potatoes are kind of getting close to the finish line. Now, these Orleans sweet potatoes here are probably still another 20 days from being ready to dig. But when you get a lot of rain at one time, towards the end of the grow out, it can cause them to kind of blow up and split and get all gnarly looking. One thing we did this year to try to circumvent that is we planted our slips a lot closer. So we planted the slips about 8 to 10 inches apart here. That was based on the recommendation from Steel. They said if you pack them in there tighter, they don't have near as much room to explode on you if you were to get a big rainstorm or a hurricane or a tropical storm when they're maturing. So hopefully that plan works for the Orleans sweet potatoes. I need to move these vines back a little bit. They're trying to crawl into these Jack Bay peas, which we planted several videos ago. These things germinated really, really well. Hopefully they don't get broke by the winds. I think they'll be okay. They're not really tall yet. Now, these two cucumber trellises here are probably going to take quite the beating, just depending on which way the wind's coming in here. That's okay because we have harvested a ton of cucumbers and made a ton of pickles just from these little 10-foot stretches here. So I'll probably pick what I can this afternoon before it starts raining, and if they get completely blistered by the wind, oh well, we've got our money's worth out of them so far. And then the only other thing I'm worried about a little bit would be our turmeric patch here. We've got this shade cloth set up on it. I really don't want that turning into a kite. Haven't made up my mind whether I should take that down or not. We might end up taking it down. This turmeric might get blown a little bit, but we've got it planted pretty thick in here. So hopefully it can kind of lean on one another even if we do start getting some 45, 50-mile-an-hour winds. That way these plants don't break because, man, some of these are looking absolutely beautiful. So not really a whole lot to worry about. We're kind of used to these things down here. You do the best you can. You put up all your patio furniture and stuff like that. You don't want stuff blowing around everywhere, but you just take what you get as far as any garden damage goes. Yeah, it may blow down all that corn over there, but we knew we were taking a chance when we planted that corn. Not going to worry about my chicken tractor here. It has survived many a storm. It's heavy enough. It's not going anywhere unless we were to get like a big tornado coming through here or something like that would destroy everything. But hurricane, tropical storm, it'll be fine. Now over here on the very back of the property, our greenhouse could take a little bit of damage, but it's pretty shielded by all those pine trees there and the barn, which is the main reason why I put it in this spot. We might get some damage to the top here, but we got to replace that anyway from the hail damage we got earlier this year. I've just been waiting on it to cool down before I do it. I don't have to be in a big hurry to replace it. Just got to get it replaced before we start getting some freezing temperatures. So after this storm, we'll probably work on that. And then inside the greenhouse here, we have 2 trays of cool season transplants going. They look decent considering all the heat they've had to deal with the last week. Now before we had some of this cool air start blowing in this past weekend, it was pretty nasty around here. We were in the high 90s for several days, which can be rough on some of these cool season transplants. So what I did was just try to come out here and water them more often, give them some cold water from the watering one there, watering them 2 to 3 times a day, even though they didn't need that much water, just trying to cool them off a little bit, and it seemed to have helped. So this fall we were trying out a new style of tray, this tray here from Bootstrap Farmer that has some bigger air holes in it, and I like what I'm seeing from this tray so far. Now over here in our PropTech tray, we've got some skips and some blanks. That mostly has to do with the fact we're using some older seeds in this tray, so it's not the tray's fault, but I really like how these transplants in this tray are looking so far, especially considering what they've had to deal with lately. And now that most of these are getting their second set of leaves, which we can see there, also called true leaves, this is when we want to start giving them some nutrients. So we use a sterile seed starting mix, Pro Mix, for all of our transplants. Having a sterile seed starting mix is nice because you don't have to worry about any soil-borne pathogens infecting your seedlings or your transplants. The downside to that is there's no nutrients in that media. So we got to start feeding these things when they start growing because there's nothing in that soil there to really give them any nutrition. And there's several different things you could use to fertilize seedlings or transplants. I would say be careful with some organic fertilizers. They could be too slow because we're only working with about a 4 to 6 week window here. We don't have a long time for organic nutrients to break down and become available to the plant. We also don't really have any biology in this Pro Mix here to break down those organic nutrients. So you got to be careful with what organic fertilizers you use. Obviously, you can use the blue stuff here, the 20-20-20. This stuff works. You just got to be really careful with it because if you do too much, you can burn the plants. So this works, just be careful with it. Now the fertilizer we like to use for our seedlings or transplants is this AgriThrive General Purpose here. This is organic, but it's what they call pre-digested, which means it's more readily available to the plants. You don't have to wait a long time for it to be broken down for the plants to then be able to use it. So back to what I was saying earlier about some organic fertilizers taking too long to really be able to feed seedlings or transplants in this short window we have. If you've got one you're wanting to try out, I would say just do a little test with it and see if it's going to work or not, and then have a backup plan, maybe with some blue stuff so you can save them if you need to save them. I'm confident in using this stuff because we've done a lot of testing with it over the last few years and I know it works. So now that you know what fertilizer we'll be using, let's talk about all the different ways we can apply or administer that fertilizer to our seedlings or transplants. As far as mixing rate goes for seedlings or transplants, usually about a ½ ounce to 1 ounce per gallon when we're using this AgriThrive General Purpose here. It doesn't take a whole lot, and I'd rather go with a higher feeding frequency than a higher feeding concentration. So yeah, you could probably bump up that concentration and still be fine, but I like going with a ½ ounce to 1 ounce per gallon and just feeding them pretty much every time I water. So you could use just a simple spray bottle like this. Now obviously this doesn't have a gallon capacity, so you'd have to calculate, your mixing rate, probably a 1/4 ounce or so for this little spray bottle here. Just spray it on the plants. I would say after you spray this on the plants with the AgriThrive, doesn't hurt to give them a little sprinkle of water. That way you don't leave any residue on the leaves. If you want to get a little fancier than that, you can use one of these little pump sprayers right here. The dollar store down the road usually has these on clearance this time of year. You can pick up one of these for $5 a lot of times, and this works pretty well. Then you've got your little hose end sprayer here where you hook up your water hose and then it sprays water and fertilizer out this end. When you're using these, you got to be careful not to make your mixture too thick or too viscous, otherwise it won't pull up through the little siphon inside this jug here. So start out with a lower rate, that way it will actually pull the fertilizer up through the water. And then we've got this rig right here, which is what we'll be using this fall. This basically connects onto your water spigot. This little siphoning tube goes down into a bucket of your fertilizer mixture, and it pulls that up through the watering system, and you can fertilize while you water. So let me show you how we install this little siphon right here. It's really, really easy. So it just screws on to our spigot right here. Get it nice and tight. There we go. And then we're going to take our water hose. Now with this thing, you can't use a really long water hose. The one I have in the greenhouse here, I think is only 10 or 12 foot long. I think the length restriction for this to work and still pull fertilizer through it, I think is 25 foot. But I would say go with a shorter water hose. It works a lot better if you use a 10, 12, 15 foot hose. So then we're just going to put our water hose on the other end of the siphon there. Make sure that's nice and tight. So now when you turn your water on, this is going to suck up whatever solution it's sitting in and inject it through your water hose, wand, hand nozzle, whatever you're using. Now in your greenhouse, your seed starting room, your garage, whatever you're using, wherever you're doing this, I'd recommend having a bucket just with water in it and then having your fertilizer bucket, because when this starts to run low, you're going to need to refill it, and you don't want to unhook all this, because if this is not sitting in any kind of water solution, it's just sucking up air. So you need this to be sitting in water or fertilizer at all times. So when you're filling your fertilizer bucket, you can just put it there in the water bucket and it's just shooting water through there. Now here in this little bucket, I've got some AgriThrive general purpose mixed up. I put about half an ounce to an ounce and then filled the rest with water. I mixed it up really good just by putting my wand down in there, moving it around, getting it nice and mixed. If this is too viscous, it won't pull up through this little spring device right here. So you don't want to mix it too strong or too thick, or else it won't pull up through there. But 1 ounce to the gallon, it should pull through there just fine. So when we want to fertilize, we just stick this down into our fertilizer bucket there, turn on our water. So now we'll have water plus fertilizer coming through our nozzle here. Now a lot of times it takes a few seconds for the fertilizer to start pulling through there. You got to kind of create that suction. So I'll just spray some water out here for a few seconds, and then it'll be coming through there, and we can water and feed our transplant. Now the reason I like this system so much is that once you get it set up, which as you can see takes just a few seconds here, you can easily fertilize every single time you water. Yeah, I may have to refill that bucket of fertilizer, I may have to mix it around every now and then, but all I got to do is come out here, turn the water on, and I'm feeding while I water. And I have found that using a low dosage and basically spoon feeding, microdosing, whatever you want to call it, feeding every time you water allows you to grow some really, really nice transplants. Now I've also used our Easy Flow fertilizer injector, the little pressurized tank injector in here to fertilize while we water. Right now I'm just really feeding those 2 trays right there, but if I've got a bunch of fig trees in here, got a bunch of different stuff I need to fertilize, I will use that tank because I'm needing to put a lot more fertilizer through there. But here just feeding a couple trays, that little brass siphon mixer works just fine. And so when you're fertilizing your seedlings or your transplants, you pretty much have full control over how fast they grow out. You can ramp up your fertilization to make them grow out faster if you really need to get these transplants ready to go in the ground. Or if your weather's not cooperating, you can back off the fertilizer a little bit. They'll grow a little slower, and you can wait on your weather to be ready to put them in the ground. Now with these behind me, like I said, I'm going to fertilize every time we water. I'm going to push these things because I want them ready fast. But let's just say summer was sticking around for a while and it was still too hot outside to put some of these cool season transplants in the ground. All I'd have to do is take that little tube, put it in my bucket of water. Now I'm just watering, I'm not fertilizing. I can slow them down a little bit if I need to. So make sure you feed your seedlings and transplants well. If you need to speed them up, ramp up your fertilization. If you need to slow them down a little bit, just back off a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. I hope that information was helpful. Don't forget to go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com, where you can find this AgriThrive fertilizer that we use for our seedlings and a lot of stuff for our in-ground garden. And if you want to see the difference this stuff can make as far as a healthy root system on transplants, check out this video right here, one we did last year, talking about a study that has been done with this stuff and how it grows some really nice roots compared to using synthetic fertilizers. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.